can't tell you how many times I've heard performers say, my agent knows and my agent tells me not to tell anybody.
Because if you post something vulnerable, then maybe you're not employable.
And that's really not a fair attitude to have. Massive things that they had planned for 2020 just vanished into thin air. The performing arts industry was one of the first ones to be shut down, and it will probably be one of the last industries to come back.
I'm seeing like the most motivated people starting to like get affected.
People have had their careers ended early because of mental health concerns. That messaging needs to come from teachers. Other times people just feel almost like blankness. If we don't have health, we don't have anything.
Hello again, it's Joel G here, and welcome to episode 4 of Manoeuvre. Our mission on this show is to facilitate meaningful conversations and spread useful information to help dancers maneuver through life and their career. Firstly, we would like to thank the City of Melbourne Council for bringing to life these first few episodes, a 5-part series where we delve into topics in mindset, health, business, and creativity. So if you think these episodes will benefit you, consider subscribing. Today's podcast is something that the whole world is dealing with in the crisis right now. We will be talking about mental health and aim to get a deeper understanding about it. Our guest for today is a passionate event specialist with 20 years experience choreographing and stage directing events and parades. She has worked on numerous international sporting events including the Olympic Games and Commonwealth Games, bringing her specialty of creating unique theatrical moments on a big scale. Combining her love of events and theater with clinical psychology, she works with touring companies, Bell Shakespeare, and CDP theater producers, and provides consultancy to Arts on Tour New South Wales and the Arts Wellbeing Collective to improve mental wellness in the sector. She has specialized in eating disorders research for 10 years and is a research stream lead at the Inside Out Institute for Eating Disorders, University of Sydney. On top of that, she is also the practice manager at Sage Clinical Psychology based in New South Wales. Please welcome the amazing and brilliant Jane Miskovic-Wheatley.
Thank you so much. That was very kind.
Thank you so much for being with us here today, Jane. I'm looking forward to today's chat because it's something that's very relevant in our society at this very moment. But before we dive in the topic of mental health, I'm really interested to know your story on being an artist and being a health professional. We always make sure as much as possible in this show that we talk to people who are not just a specialist in their field, but also understand the performing arts world. So with your journey, was there a correlation between both passions, or did it devolve from one to the other, or how did these unfold for you?
I think they have always run parallel with me. So I was a dancer growing up, was always involved with productions and performing since I could stand, pretty much. And I then did a lot of performing at school as I possibly could. Then went to university and did a science degree because I was quite interested in academia as well. And then everything kind of went in parallel. I would literally go kind of 6 months between my studies. And then I ended up working in the industry quite early on. The biggest event that came was the Sydney 2000 Olympics, and I was very fortunate to be part of the choreographic team, and that just led to quite a long career with having amazing opportunities to work around the world. But I kept coming back to psychology. That was kind of my core industry. That's what I was coming back to work in, and I realized that the connection was that I loved stories. Like in production, in performance, in creative work, I love the narratives of people using their expressiveness to understand the world and to understand themselves. And psychology is the same. It's people trying to make sense of themselves in the world. So I was literally doing things in parallel. And then I was working for a theatre company that I had been a director and a movement director for. And in 2017, there started to be a real push, especially in the theatre industry and in particular the touring arts industry, where they realised that there was real concern for people's wellness while they were on the road, because there was a lot of reasons. They were disconnected from family and friends. It was very hard to maintain a work-life balance, and people were becoming unwell. So the industry started to recognise that we needed to do something about that. And so I was contacted to say, no one seems to be doing anything. Do you have any ideas? And I started to work with CDP and then Bell Shakespeare and Arts on Tour, and we started to develop resources. And since then, so many more resources have come online, and then that has been kind of almost pulling it together. We're seeking out other psychologists who are working in the field. We're getting resources from governments and from funding agencies to try to create resources for everybody across the performing arts and to really start a conversation. So it was two different parallel careers, but then they merged with my two areas of interest, and I feel a real dedication to try to work and try to improve the case for mental health in the performing arts industry.
Let's talk about like the dance industry and the performing arts industry. So what are the most common like mental health issues that you see?
I think it's really important to recognise that people who are drawn to the performing arts and drawn to dance are incredibly special people. They tend to be highly driven people with really high standards, and there are risks there often people experience and continue to work through really high levels of stress. We know that creative people are often inspired and rejuvenated by their creative expression, but it's incredibly personal, and the creative process can also reveal a lot of periods of self-doubt or mental blocks or questioning oneself or their own unique creative voice. Working within an industry such as this, it's highly competitive. So we know that it's an absolute roller coaster of having to build yourself up and prepare for auditions or prepare for that next opportunity. There's a lot of anxiety around that. And then, if things don't play out the way, there can often be a real big fall in mood and you've got to pick yourself up. So it's almost like the industry demands a constant roller coaster of emotions in a way. There's kind of a challenge that obviously a lot of people are between jobs or between work or between opportunities, and it takes a lot of motivation to keep yourself moving forward and to keep yourself well, and that can take a lot of effort. People who are working, that's amazing and wonderful, but work is hard. People who are doing 8 shows a week, they're disconnected from their family and friends. If they're on tour, they don't have any opportunity to catch up with their life like they usually would. We know stress levels are high when you're on tour and when you're in a show. We know that people will work because the show must go on. So we know dancers work with injuries. We know stage managers vomit into a bucket and still call a show. Like, it is so dependent on every single person. It's an impossible industry to have a sick day in or just to kind of phone it in on that day. It requires 100% effort all of the time. We know that a lot of practitioners don't have full income or also kind of work below the poverty line. So financial stress is a really big thing. Long periods of low work can be really hard to maintain that positive self-image and to keep that motivation going forward. And we know that for dancers, there are particular risk factors. There's so much focus on body shape and weight. So it can lead to driven exercise and dietary restrictions and compensatory behaviours, which is really high risk for eating disorders. And we also know that there's a high rate of injury that can really impact on somebody's sense of self. And then if they can't continue in their chosen profession because of an injury, well, who are they and what do they do? And every industry has its risk factors, but we do know that people in the performing arts are more at risk. But it also was very, very difficult to talk about because people don't want to be seen as having, and it's not a weakness, but don't want to be seen as that way. There is a lot of stigma in the industry and really in the community in general. So that's why it's really important, and I really value the opportunity to be having these conversations, because we need to be bringing these issues out of the wings and into the spotlight, and also for the industry to be aware of creating a safe and healthy and mentally well experience for people so that they can continue to work well, just as every industry has the obligation to do.
And again, just what you said about especially the not wanting to be seen as weak, because every dancer, every artist is basically their own brand, so every post that you do, like let's say for example in social media, needs to have this like fairy tale almost like Superman image, because if you post something vulnerable, then maybe you're not employable, and that's a huge danger.
Absolutely, and what you're putting out there is up for people's opinion. And we know you have to have the toughest skin to be in this industry, because you're constantly being judged and observed. There's also nothing objective about it. It's not the person who runs the fastest. It is so subjective. So to keep your sense of self really, really strong, remain vulnerable, which is what we need to do as an artist, but then also be impenetrable so that you can actually kind of withstand the industry. It's a really tricky thing to balance.
Plus the fact that we're not really given tools in our training to withstand or, deal with
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
I'm really passionate. And the reason why we do these podcasts is to educate performing artists and dancers in general on, other things that they can learn, because most of the things that they learn in their classes are just performing arts kind of stuff, like choreography classes or how to perform, how to execute things. But there's not really, or it's very, very rare to have any kind of mindset classes, psychological classes.
And I think, like anything, there's elements that are part of the industry. Like, we've got to be realistic and go, there's elements that won't change, but we can definitely be better prepared for it. And to, like, as you're saying, kind of make sure that you've got a realistic picture of what you're going into, that you've got real tools, that you know where there's risk factors, that you can seek support, and that also we can have honest conversations within the industry.
So we kind of touched on that on what we just said, but what are the misconceptions on like mental health?
Mental health is a continuum. It's moving between somebody feeling mentally well, that they can get on with their day and do everything that they need to do, to somebody who's experiencing really significant symptoms that might be having a negative impact on their life or those around them. Mental health is really complex and based on so many factors, including genetics, biology, family history, child development, adult experiences of trauma, illness, injury, self-care, current stresses. So a big misconception is that talking about mental health is a straightforward conversation, and also that one person's experience is the same as somebody else, because it's not. The experience can be just as individual as the person themselves, which is why we have to be very careful and considerate in our conversations. Another thing is that people choose to be mentally well or not, that someone who is suffering depression can just change their outlook and get out of bed in the morning, that somebody who is highly anxious can just stop worrying, or somebody who is experiencing symptoms of an eating disorder can just eat more food. There are certain steps that people can take definitely to improve things, to seek treatment, to seek support, to talking to somebody, to making sure that they're involved in improving the situation. But people who are experiencing periods of unwell need kindness, care, support, and understanding. And again, that recognition that nobody from the outside can really experience what it is for them. So the best thing that we can do is to support people. I think another misconception is that people can't work or function well if they're unwell. And many times that's not the case. Many, many people manage their depression or anxiety or other mental health diagnoses really well, especially with psychological support or medication support, a support network, just in the same way that somebody might be able to still dance while managing an injury, or still, manage a chronic illness, but still be able to work really, really well. The thing is that mental illness is invisible, and we want to be able to talk openly about it, but people's personal experiences also need to be kept confidential, and people are under no obligation to inform or disclose, especially if they're in a work environment. Yet, if I went into my work environment and said, I have a bad back, but I can still work, it's up to my employer to make sure I have a chair or a standing desk that best suits my ability to work well. So part of this is that we want to try to say, and tear down that misconception that people kind of can't work. They can work really, really well, especially if they're supported. And again, especially if we feel comfortable to have these open communications. Many people I know embrace their experience with mental illness, and it's part of their creative process and it's part of their expression, and they actually wouldn't have the creative voice that they have without that unique perspective. So in short, we really don't know what's going on for the person who's standing next to us. So if we can just make sure that we're kind and respectful and supportive and expect the same back to us, hopefully people will feel more comfortable about sharing their experiences.
Let's just go back a little bit, because you said earlier also that there are certain things in the industry that is also like strength building. Like, I've learned a lot of, tenacity and being kind of like the show must go on kind of attitude. So what is like the difference between like mental health issue and maybe somebody's having a bad day or just generally unmotivated?
Look, everybody has bad days. Everybody feels unmotivated at times. But when somebody feels unwell really significantly or for an extended period of time, or they're not enjoying activities that they used to, or they just don't even feel like they can enjoy the activities or even kind of participate, when it's impacting their personal relationships or kind of impacting the way that they're sitting with themselves. Like, as you said, you have to often really kind of have that positive self-talk and really boost come on, we can get up and do this. And sometimes if people just, no matter what they do, they just can't shake those negative voices in their head or those negative feelings. Also, when the way that they're feeling is starting to impact their self-care, it's impacting their sleep, it's impacting kind of their digestion or how they want to eat. They don't want to go out and exercise, they don't want to take class. Those types of factors can really start to spiral around each other, and that's when somebody really needs to make sure that they're seeking help. But again, it's a different experience for everyone. So there's no checklist, there's no kind of goal that you have to pass, there's no box you have to tick. If somebody is feeling any of these symptoms, especially a cluster of these symptoms, really significantly or for an extended period of time, it's really important that they seek help, get an assessment, and engage in treatment if that's something that's advised of them.
I think that's very important to know because, a lot of the things we hear from like coaches or even just peers, it's just like, yo, let's just toughen up. Let's just go,
And that's really not a fair attitude to have. I mean, especially in 2020, we can see how important health is. If we don't have health, we don't have anything. And that is mental health as well as physical health, because they're so connected. So like we're kind of seeing, if things are recognized early and you jump onto it and you seek support, you can get help when things are kind of small or less significant problems. The longer we leave things, the worse the impact can be, the harder it can be to recover from. And we know it's going to play out. People have had their careers ended early because of mental health concerns. People have struggled to move ahead or probably seek the goals that they wanted to seek because of mental health concerns. We've all seen people around us as well. Whenever I've come to speak to a group, I ask people to just do a gentle nod. If they themselves or someone who is close to them or someone who they've worked with have ever experienced mental health concerns. I've never been in a room of people for the last 4 years that not every single person has nodded. So these are things that we need to think about. And I think the other key thing is, if you're worried about someone, ask.
Yeah.
It's not the obligation of the person to say anything, but usually the fact that someone noticed and took the effort to ask can be really, really powerful. The majority of people who are experiencing mental health concerns feel isolated and alone. They feel like nobody around can understand what they're going through. So it can be really, really powerful just to pull somebody aside and say, hey mate, like I've just noticed things are all a bit different. I care about you. I just want to check in. If you ever need to talk, if you ever want to go for a walk or go and get a coffee, now or in the future, just let me know, so that can be a really, really powerful tool to people and to recognize that they're not alone.
Powerful and also very simple.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and I know we touched on this earlier about the stigma of being weak, perhaps. But is there anything that you can add in terms of the stigma surrounding mental health and especially surrounding seeking assistance?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think there is a stigma around seeking assistance or even recognizing that somebody might have a mental health concern in the performing arts and in the dance industry. This is a sector where impression is everything competitive. And success is often so subjective and almost lucky. Like we know how talented our industry is, and yet we know the vast majority of people, the majority of time, are not working because just the opportunities are not there. It's just so competitive. So it is really difficult for somebody to actually say, I might be vulnerable, or I might be struggling, or I have a mental health concern. to recognize when they need help. And I do think things are improving, but there's so much more work that we need to do. I think people can learn from other people. So the more that we talk and share, the more that we can understand that we're not alone. But it's not just up to the individual to raise concern. That messaging needs to come from teachers, and performing arts high schools. It needs to come from full-time and tertiary education. It needs to come from agents and managers. I can't tell you how many times I've heard performers say, my agent knows and my agent tells me not to tell anybody because it makes me less employable. And yet I've worked with so many companies who have integrated this care really well, and also producers have said, we recognise that if we're interested in working with a creative person and this is part of their story, that person wouldn't be the same if that wasn't part of their story. And we can help people work in a place that's secure and healthy and safe. I mean, there's so much research to show the impact that mental health concern does have, the financial impact, the lack of productivity. We know that shows get cancelled left, right and centre because people are unwell. And so it's really up to the industry to actually make it a safe place for people to be able to talk. And it's complicated, but there are lots of things that have changed and that can happen. I know that companies like touring arts companies and touring arts funding bodies are trying to, companies and producers are trying to make sure that funding arts bodies at least make sure that companies who are on tour have 2 consecutive days off every 6 weeks. Now, that has been something that would have stopped a tour getting funded in the past because it's not economical enough. But people are working 6 days a week to have 1 day off to sleep and to do their washing and to get back up again, but not actually having a day off, just to have a day off. So there's no work-life balance. We know that the Arts Wellbeing Collective, for example, created an 8-page Tour Well guide that I was one of the writers on. And that is an open access guide that any company can call. And it's 8 pages of really simple solutions that people can take with them while they're on tour, or even kind of while they're working in a show, or just really in their general practice. That's really art-specific, practical strategies that you can adopt to be aware of how important it is to maintain your self-care, how important it is to seek support when you need it. And that's a free and open resource that's available. And again, it's knowing that people who are in the industry, such as agents and managers and producers, that it's an open door policy. And so one of the really important things that I've been able to participate in as working with companies like CDP and Bell Shakespeare, I go and work with their performing artists and their stage managers and their technical teams because they're under just as much stress as everybody else is. We dedicate a number of hours in the rehearsal time to prepare people for the tour, to prepare people about how they can stay well and what they can do if they don't feel well. And I've seen, even over the last 3 or 4 years, the incidence of mental health concerns while people have been working have dropped dramatically. And I think the key message is because people felt it was safe to talk about.
And I've also learned one thing that is important is what you said earlier about tackling it when it's still not as bad. Also, creating an environment that doesn't create stress was a big thing for me. Because before I would just be like, when I was like a young leader, I'd be like, everybody do this, you gotta do this, polish, everybody needs to be perfect. But then I really thought of different ways of communicating because not everybody understands, messages in the same way. When I've become more sensitive on that, I've actually seen, like right now, there's almost no drama because of the way I've become more sensitive with these things and just the way I create the environment to be more stress-free than just like military style.
That's really interesting. And it's not that we're saying that we're not striving to be the best we can possibly be or not create the best work that we possibly can, but we want to get there in a healthy, sustainable way. And that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that experience. You can get the same or probably better outcomes, but you've actually got to have the company of people that you're working with. And we know that a little bit of stress is fine, having a deadline or having an opening night, or it does, gives you a bit of adrenaline and it kind of makes you focus a little bit more. But there's a point that stress becomes so, so difficult and so disabling that you actually can't move through it. So it's trying to find that balance.
Yeah, and even like something I've changed is like before I would call out someone in front of everyone, but now I would call them out privately.
Mm-hmm.
Such a huge difference it makes, because now that person will feel that you are like you care about them rather than like just punishing them in front of everyone.
And that's really interesting. And it comes back to the thing is that if anybody is struggling, you can't see it, So, and again, if somebody is having a bad day or is struggling with someone, if you call them out in front of everybody else, you're not going to get a good outcome. They're not going to feel that they can trust you or kind of come to you if they do have any problems or concerns. But I mean, it sounds like when you've pulled them aside and you've had a one-on-one conversation, you can understand it from their point of view. They can understand it from your point of view, and you might be able to find a better solution.
Yeah, so just some adjustments are really helpful. Let's talk about this crazy situation that we're in right now in the world. I mean, to be honest, I'm not very familiar with the severity of mental health, as it hasn't been really visible in my life journey. I'm mainly involved in the world of hip hop dance, and I'm not saying there's no mental health issues in our world. However, it's a very upbeat and fun community, so it's quite difficult to detect within our parameters. And again, also hang out with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of leaders. So a huge majority of who I deal with day to day are strong, empowered people. But with what's happening now, I'm seeing like the most motivated people starting to like get affected. In our generation, we've never experienced anything like this. So can you tell me, from what you're witnessing, what is it about this pandemic that's affecting our community the most?
I mean, you're absolutely right. This is where we're seeing cracks in the system. This is where we're seeing people who, as we were saying before, usually are so good at building themselves up and being motivated, just feeling disenfranchised and just feeling like, how much more do we need to push? So this whole period has been so stressful globally, and that's the virus itself, but also the very required but very challenging public health response, what we've had to do to try to actually manage the virus and its spread. And it's been absolutely necessary to take these measures to flatten the curve. We can see when those measures aren't taken and what happens. But it took a while for people to realise that there was a mental health toll that was being played by having all of the shutdowns. It means that people lost opportunities and they lost work, and massive things that they had planned for 2020 just vanished into thin air. And we know in the performing arts, it's not just a matter of waking up one day and putting on a show. There's massive amounts of work and collaboration and intent that goes into actually kind of creating this work, not only the production side, but the thinking and the rehearsals and the creative practice. All of those things, we're such hard workers, and then to not be able to see any of that work fulfilled or have opportunities that we've been working on for so long, just, as I said, kind of go, because the performing arts industry was one of the first ones to be shut down, and it will probably be one of the last industries to come back. Yeah. We know that as artists, we have to fight for recognition anyway, like on a regular basis, but now we're fighting with every other industry. And what's really interesting is we've also it's almost like we've forgotten about it, but we had bushfires, really significant bushfires earlier in the year, and the first group of people who started raising money and started to give support were performing artists. And when all of this happened, it's like, well, but who supports the performing artists? And that's industry, when we're the ones that need the recognition or kind of need the financial support.
We ran an event that raised $13,000 for the bushfires, so we were part of that.
Exactly. And every person that I knew was like, no, let's kind of get together, because that's what the arts does. It recognizes what's happening in the community and it responds. And that's why this is so challenging, because it's like, well, how do we respond when we don't know how the industry is going to be start up again? There are some really kind of significant risk factors, I think, not only with these really massive and traumatic changes, but that people just haven't been able to engage in their regular lives. They've had work taken away. They haven't been able to engage in class or socializing the way that they'd want to. We know that this is having an impact because we know that calls to mental health lines have been significantly higher. We know that people are seeking mental health plans through their GPs. Now, I have seen some really positive signs. So CDP, company that I work with, I was in the rehearsal room with them only last week. All of their tours were kind of put off for a number of months, and their first tour is about to get back on the road, and they're having to rethink their whole practice within a COVID-safe environment. So the performers are wearing face masks. All of the blocking has to be changed. They can only be within 1.5 meters for 15 seconds at a time. So it's impacting their blocking. It's impacting their choreography. They have to, if performers have to sing, they have to think about which direction they're facing so that their, droplets are going away from everybody else. Everybody's, sanitizing within each of their life and checking in and out. Performers I know who are on tour, who I'm working with, who are over in South Korea, who've started their first tour of Cats. They had to isolate in a hotel for 2 weeks. They're working. They're not allowed to go out and socialize. They're not allowed to go and get a drink after the show. They are literally in lockdown, and they move from the hotel to the rehearsal room, to the theatre and back. And that will be probably for 11 months. So, the arts industry is coming back, but this is the time to actually kind of think, if we thought we had to be creative thinkers before, we have to be really creative thinkers now as we figure out how to start back practice and get the industry moving and the opportunities moving for individuals back again.
I want to just point out that artists can also use their creativity in that way, not just in an art form or, choreography, but they can also use their creativity in how to deal with things in life. And also, because I always inspire or encourage performing artists to be creative in the way they run their business also, not just, because there's different ways of using creativity. And I know that you have a current research study about the impact of COVID-19 on people with eating disorder. Can you tell us more about that?
So as well as being a clinician within the performing arts, I work as a research manager for the Inside Out Institute of Eating Disorders at University of Sydney, and we started a study quite early on in this, looking at the specific impact of people who may be experiencing eating disorder concerns or symptoms, because there were particular things that we knew would be risk factors. Things like social isolation can be a really big risk factor for an increase in symptoms. Things like people not being able to go at those really early stages, and kind of a few times since then, to go to the supermarket and buy foods that they feel safe eating. Exercise becoming a mandatory or essential activity, which for somebody who struggles with driven exercise can be a really kind of hard thing to come to terms with. People just not being able to engage in those regular activities that help, again, keep them well, such as going to work or socialising or engaging in enjoyable activities. And also there was real concern early on, and it actually kind of continues, that people weren't seeking help for anything other than COVID, because if they weren't going to see a doctor for things that they would normally, because they were too afraid of going to the GPs, or again, everything just seemed like it was too stressful. We know, again, that calls to eating disorder hotlines have increased. We've started to look at the results of the study, and out of the first 200 participants, 80% have said that their eating disorder symptoms have increased over this period of time. And there's also been a change, because people who were in treatment, who are seeing clinicians face-to-face, have gone to telehealth. And for an illness that has not only a psychological component but also a medical component, it can be really challenging for the people to seek treatment and clinicians to be able to work with people if they can't do the medical checks that they need to do. So it was a real risk area, and so we're using this study to try to understand what are those risks, what are those danger areas, what is the experience of people who are using telehealth, because this might be the way for an extended period of time, and to get those results back out into the healthcare sector so we can be better prepared to help people as they need help. So this study is open to anybody who has had a diagnosed eating disorder across Australia, anybody over the age of 16 years or over, but it's also for anybody who has experienced eating disorder symptoms, even if they've never sought treatment even if they've never been formally diagnosed, because we know only about a quarter of people who do experience some of these things actually ever seek treatment. So again, kind of understanding the experience that people are going through means that we can develop resources for GPs so that they can actually be more aware of people who may be presenting, so that they're asking the right sensitive questions and that they're making sure that treatment is targeted. So anybody who has experienced body shape or weight concerns, who has dietary restrictions or expressions of binge eating or other compensatory behaviours, or has that real driven exercise that they try to do to maintain weight, any of those people, we really invite them to be part and to share their experience with us. So you can learn more about the study at edstudy.com.au. That's edstudy.com.au. And you can go, and we're hoping people will fill in the initial baseline survey, and then we're inviting people to every 2 months to come back and to let us know how things are tracking for them. And when we first launched the study in late May, we thought, oh, maybe things are over. And then Victoria happened, and then things are rearing up again. So we really want to try to track this experience over time for people. And again, so that we can feed back and have the healthcare industry better able to provide service for people who are experiencing some of these things.
I know that we touched on this earlier in terms of like kind of finding ways kind of seeing if there's any signs of depression or anxiety from certain people. But is there any particular specific signs that we need to look out for ourselves and for other people that, we know are struggling with depression or anxiety during this time?
I mean, as we said before, this can be a very unique experience, but there does tend to be some common things. So obviously feeling low mood, feeling low motivation. Sometimes people do experience what they would say is sadness. Other times people just feel almost like blankness, or that they just kind of don't feel things the way that they were feeling before. People who are experiencing anxiety obviously have an increase in anxious thoughts, and we all have anxious thoughts or worrying thoughts that come in and out of our head. But if people are unwell, they don't go out of the head quite as easily, and they can escalate and they can disrupt sleep. It's almost that you don't have that positive self-talk to be able to talk yourself through some of those real negative thoughts or anxious thoughts. Changes in sleep. And again, there's kind of no hard and fast rule. Sometimes if people can't get to sleep, or they can get to sleep but they can't stay asleep for a period of time and they're waking up just staring at the ceiling, worrying in the middle of the night. Or the other side is sometimes people who just, no matter how much they sleep, even if they're sleeping for 8, 9, 10 hours, they're waking up still feeling really fatigued. Appetite changes, so sometimes people just can't eat. It's like they're just kind of, the thought of food makes them sick. Or other people will kind of recognize that they're eating a lot more than they normally would, almost in an uncontrollable fashion. People, and this is a good kind of warning sign for people who you're close to, if people who are feeling socially withdrawn, that they're just kind of going out but they're not engaging, or if friends who would normally answer a lot of text messages just kind of stop answering them for a period of time, or there's something about the feeling or the tone of their messaging that has changed, that might be a sign that people are feeling socially withdrawn. And we do have to be aware of that, because obviously we're not out and about and seeing each other in the same way that we would normally. Sometimes if people are feeling low mood, they might not necessarily feel sadness, but it kind of more transpires that they're feeling angry or irritated. So that can be another sign that people they can't seem to calm down, and they're kind of really jumpy, or even have some erratic behavior. So just if you find people that are just the behavior is changing in a significant way, that can be something to be concerned about. Sometimes it's people recognize that they're just thinking changes, that they just kind of can't seem to sit there and focus on one thing. And that is obviously a real risk at the moment, because people are having to be so self-motivated to be able to maintain a sense of normal life or normal practice, and they're having to get up and do their classes in their home, or they're having to sit down at their desk and really try to seek work or apply for jobs or apply for grants or do self-directed study. But people are just finding I just can't, and not just for a couple of days, but it's just consistently that they just can't focus or they can't make decisions. They're really kind of confused. That can be another sign. And people who are just not enjoying life the way that they used to. That's something to be aware of. And obviously, if people are starting to engage in unsafe behaviour, if there's a more of a likelihood that people will engage in self-harm behaviour, or if they're having suicidal ideation, that's obviously where we really need to make sure that people seek help as early as possible.
Wow, crazy. So what are the solutions that we can do, Jane?
I think the first thing is to recognise that this is an incredibly stressful time for everybody, but to also know that our experience through this is obviously very unique. So the first thing that we have to do is make sure that we're taking care of ourselves first. We need to be strong to help the people around us. We need to be strong to be able to get our industry back on its feet. And they are really simple things that you do every single day. You need to sleep well. You need to make sure that you are resting your body and your brain and your heart from the day and feeling like you wake up the next morning and can get back into it. You need to eat well. If you don't eat well, you don't have the fuel to be strong. You need to move. You need to get that tension or lethargy out of your body. So that's why, engaging in your dance practice any way you possibly can, or getting out and exercising or walking. The weather's starting to brighten up, hopefully. So getting out and getting fresh air, seeing things that are green, seeing other people's faces, or even just their eyes if they're, hopefully wearing their mask. We need to start to really connect with people in a meaningful way. You need to do things that you enjoy, that are fun. And all of these self-care strategies often feel like they're at the end of the list. We'll take care of ourselves if we have time, or if we've kind of gotten through everything else we need to get through. That can't be the attitude. We have to take care of ourselves first, because everything else will be impacted. So you have to engage in things that you like to do. You've got to kind of build those positive emotions and get those endorphins flowing. And then if somebody is worried about themselves, or they are worried about somebody who they interact with regularly, is to seek support. So to seek help early, and know that it's never too late to ask for help. And then also what we can do is making sure that we're checking in on others, just to think about the people that, if everyone thought about 2 or 3 people that they're really important to their heart, and make sure they check in on them. If everybody did that, we'd be in a much better place.
When you said do something that you like to do, because I've spoken to a few dancers, and a lot of them just like to dance and almost nothing else. So, but I think you also have other interests, but sometimes you need to talk about it with somebody and help you kind of create that awareness and bring those other interests up.
The thing that we do actually have at the moment is time. And that's usually the thing that we don't have. Usually we're all working so hard to fulfill a project, or to, the busyness of the day. We have time to all of those things that we've put into the, I'll do that if and when, or I'll do that on my day off, or I'll do that if I ever take a break. This is the time to be doing those things, And also, I really think that it's an amazing opportunity. As we said at the beginning, this is a very challenging, wonderful, but unreliable industry. And the more multi-skilled we can be, the more connections we can have, the more diverse our practice is only going to build us to be stronger practitioners moving forward. So, let's use this moment where the world has stopped to build ourselves up and come back bigger, brighter, stronger. Yeah.
Upskill, personal development. It's just the perfect time. There's no excuse.
No excuse. But also to actually make those self-care strategies part of your regular day-to-day. None of those things should go away when we go back to our regular work practice. And again, the more we can engage in that self-care, the better our practice will be. So again, it's the time.
Yeah, great. Let's talk about specific support that people can go to. What is there out there that's available? Where can they go? Who can they call? And are they free service, for example, as well?
Mm-hmm. The first thing to do is to recognise that if anybody is in crisis, it should be treated in the same way that a physical illness should be treated. So if anybody feels that they're in danger of harming themselves or somebody else, they need to call somebody. Somebody needs to check on them. They can't be alone. They need to call 000. They need to go to a hospital emergency room. That we need to make sure that people are safe. first and foremost. So that needs to be, everyone needs to be aware that a mental health crisis is seen the same and should be treated the same way as a physical health crisis. There are amazing 24-hour support services available in Australia, such as Lifeline and Beyond Blue, that have all given a lot more resourcing, and the government's provided a lot more resources to these organisations, so there are more people answering the calls. There's also a text service, and I know a number of the people that I speak with find that really good. So rather than being on the phone with somebody, there's a text backwards and forwards service, so it kind of gives people a little bit more time, but they still know that there's somebody that's there listening. There is, from the Arts Wellbeing Collective and the Arts Centre in Melbourne, you have an amazing resource, and they have the Support Act Wellbeing Helpline. And so that is a 24-hour service, and they are people who are on the end of the phone who are interested in the performing arts, clinicians who have specific performing arts training. So when people call them, they understand more than maybe the general mental health line does about what it is to be a performing artist or engage in the performing arts industry. And also they've had lots of updated training during this period of time so that they have a sense of what's actually going on for people in the arts. And that's anybody can call any of these services 24 hours a day, free of charge. If anybody have specific resources for eating disorders, the Butterfly Foundation has a 1-800-HOPE line, and that's, I think, during regular business hour days, but that's specifically about eating disorders. If anybody has any questions or concerns, or all of these lines, it's not just calling for yourself. Even if you are concerned about somebody else, you can seek advice. If anybody is feeling unwell, then the best thing to do is to go to your GP and talk about it, or to have a telehealth session, because there is also better access to mental health care plans, so that people can, if they are experiencing significant symptoms, and there's definitely a push in the field to recognise these things early, that then you can have 6 to 10 sessions with a psychologist. And that used to always have to be face-to-face, but due to our current situation, it's also telehealth, which means that there is now more access to psychological services than there has ever been in the past. Now, there are a number of psychologists who will do those for Medicare rates, or even if it's higher, it's still significantly cheaper than psychological therapy is. And I know my practice has just escalated. I'm trying to see as many people as I possibly can, but there's a real dedication for psychologists who work in the field, who understand what we're going through, to provide as much service as we possibly can. But really, with all of those things, there's always people you can talk to. But coming back to those self-care strategies, just work as well, just as prevention does, as well as kind of the first line of treatment. You need to take care of yourself first. And you also, the more that you can talk to someone that you trust, to know that you're not alone, and that you've got people that you trust that you can call, is really important, that we keep talking.
The psychologist service with Medicare,
mm-hmm.
is that, can you only talk about COVID-19 issues?
No. I mean, there's been a lot more resourcing, and as we said, it used to be to get Medicare supported psychological sessions, it used to have to be face-to-face, but due to the current situation, they can be telehealth services as well. So that is, I think there's wide recognition that mental health concerns are escalating and have been for the last number of months. So it doesn't need to be COVID related. That's actually about, I'm experiencing low mood or high levels of anxiety. Just go and talk to your GP about what they're going through, and the GP will kind of have a conversation with you, have a look at what the risk factors are, and then my general experience is that anybody who's needed a plan has been able to get one.
Did you want to add something about your current study?
Yeah. So just a reminder, if anybody feels that the research study that we're conducting is something that might apply to them, or someone that we're really trying to recruit as many experiences as possible, it's a brief 20-minute online survey. All responses are de-identified. So, of course, there's never any individual parts of information that's there. We're doing a group analysis, so you can find out more about the study for anybody over the age of 16 years or over across Australia from all different backgrounds, edstudy.com.au.
Amazing. We're ending our interview soon. What is your message to anyone that's listening that may be affected during this time?
To recognize this is a very challenging time, and it's understandable to have periods where you're feeling that your motivation is waning, or that you feel upset or scared or overwhelmed or even angry. But we are going to get through this together. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to take care of the people around us. And we need to really know that we can do lots of things to use this time to come back more resilient, stronger, and more creative than we did before. It's a long journey. It's a long journey for the performing arts, but we are rebuilding, and we want to make sure that everybody's part of that rebuilding process with us.
Cool. Thank you so much for all that, Jane. I have one last question for you today. What is the one thing that you'd like to encourage everyone in the world to do more of?
I think if I could encourage everybody in the world to do one thing, it would just to be kind to themselves and to be kind to the people around us. Remember, we just don't know what's going on for everybody else, but to be able to check in on people, to make eye contact with people that we're socially distanced from, to make sure that we're smizing above our masks, but just to know that we are all in this together, and that the first thing that we can do is just to be kind, and everything else will be easier from there.
Amazing. Is there a way where people can follow your work?
So I think a really great resource is to go to the Arts Wellbeing Collective, which is run out of the Arts Centre of Melbourne. And for the last number of years, they've been doing amazing work specifically for the performing arts. So they have the support at Wellbeing Helpline. They have Tour Well resources that you can download. And I actually find it's really good self-care strategies for people who are in isolation, because it's kind of like being on tour. You're living in a hotel room, or you're living in your apartment and unable to kind of get out and do things you'd regularly do. They also have meditations specifically for artists, and they have lots of podcasts and videos, and it really feels like a community, and they're coming up with more and more resources over the time. I do a lot of work with them, and that would be a great place for people to go.
Thank you so much, Jane, for talking to us today and for all those resources and help. Really appreciate you and your work in this world.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for all of the great work that you and your team are doing as well.
Before we end the show, your question of the day is, what's something new that you've learned today in the topic of mental health? I hope today's episode has brought some guidance on how to deal with and help our dance community in this time. Do subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Remember to spread joy through your movement, and I will see you next time.